When it comes to talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol, it is really important to understand, and I mean really important to understand, if we do not get this right, and I am deadly serious about this, if we do not get this right, a lot of stuff could go wrong. It was only, I believe, a month ago where you had the Belfast Telegraph saying that there was a potential plan that got called off at the last moment because some of these negotiations were taking place. So, and people forget, there's a lot of people out there who, when they're talking about this, don't seem to really mention that or appreciate the fact that if you do this, a lot of stuff could go wrong, and it could go wrong very quickly. And the fact that we had that, obviously I can't, say exactly what it is, but I think you sort of, shall we say, get the pretty, explosive idea I'm trying to get across to you, what was planned, then, yeah, I think you get it. So this is very worrying that when we see these conversations, they really don't understand the urgency and the potentiality of the consequences of getting this wrong. And we can see the DUP being the biggest roadblock to all this, but no one seems to want to call out the DUP for what they are doing. So today we're going to have a look at Conservative Home to see how, according to them, how Sunak could fix this conundrum. Get ready for this one. Get ready for this one, folks. Get ready. So, strap yourselves in, press the like and share button, and of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for supporting the channel. There's links down below, Patreon page, one notification link, buy me coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the thank you button, the pony club, all that's down below. So, as always, guys, let's crack on with this and let's go over to Conservative Home to see what they think about this whole Northern Ireland Protocol mess that Rishi Sunak's got himself into now. So, let's see. So, this is over in Conservative Home with the title of The Least Bad Solution to the Northern Ireland Protocol Problem from Sunak's Point of View. I like that. That it's the least bad solution. Should we not be going for the best solution when you are trying to solve this problem? Should we not be aiming, for the best solution, not the least bad solution? I just... Right, okay. So, Northern Ireland requires an executive. Pardon me. Oh, but yeah. There we go. So, Northern Ireland requires an executive if its government is to be effective. Since the former is an integral part to the Belfast Agreement and to the political architecture that it established. This executive has not been in place for most of the last 5 years. Its absence leaves a gap which Republican and loyalist paramilitaries can exploit, and they have exploited it. As we said at the beginning, it was not too long ago there was a plot called off at the last moment, from what we have, from what at least the Belfast Telegraph was reporting, which leaves a party linked to the first, Sinn Féin, as a gathering force in opposition. This has implications for the Irish Republic, where the party is also on the rise. The main aim of the talks between the UK and the EU about the Northern Ireland Protocol must therefore be to get the Democratic Unionist Party back into government, in which it is refusing to serve precisely because of the trade barriers between Great Britain and Northern Ireland that the protocol has thrown up. This was not news. The DUP knew about this. The whole reason they, collaborated with the ERG was to get rid of Theresa May because they didn't like her backstop idea. And neither did the ERG, because that would have meant that essentially the UK would remain pretty much in the customs union and have to follow all these rules and regulations, which they are desperately at the moment, with Jacob Rees-Mogg's Retain the EU Law Bill, is trying to get rid of. That is the best solution. So it shocks me that if you want the best solution, maybe we should revisit Theresa May's solution. I mean, Theresa May's solution, bear in mind, wasn't the best one in the world either. But no barrier. There would be no barriers at that point. There would be no, official border between, in the Irish Sea. And of course, you can't have one. Again, as we point out every single time, they just seem to ignore this crucial conversation that Britain has an obligation under its Belfast Agreement / Good Friday Agreement, basically that says you cannot have a hard land border between the north of Ireland and the Republic. We have signed up to that. And now you've got the DUP who overthrew Theresa May, who buddied up with the ERG to throw out Theresa May, backed getting in Boris Johnson, and then basically were thrown under the bus. This is their baby. They were also proclaiming, like many of the Brexiteers, that this bill was going to be amazing. This oven-ready Brexit deal was going to be amazing. They are complaining about the very thing that they overthrew a sitting British Prime Minister to get. And the DUP and its 7 points that we've gone over before are completely unenforceable. Completely unenforceable. It's a fantasy dream that they have because they cannot stand the idea of that border being in the Irish Sea. Even though, to be honest, when you look at Northern Ireland, you look at its trade, you look at its economy, performing far better than the rest of the country. But back to it. So, furthermore, Joe Biden wants a settlement. So there must be one, preferably by April 10th, the Belfast Agreement's 25th anniversary. And Democrat presidents take a special interest in Northern Ireland because of the relationship between their party and the Irish American vote. So, just as Bill Clinton helped to create the agreement, so Biden is set on fixing the protocol. Rishi Sunak's government is therefore set on a solution as soon as possible. So far, so conventional. But I wonder if this reading provides an accurate snapshot of the political landscape. It really doesn't. You want what's really caused all this? Brexit has caused all this. Remember, people like Kate Hoey and the rest of the Brexiteers said Northern Ireland wouldn't be a problem. Why? Because they were advocating staying in the single market and customs union because they wanted as wide a snapshot as they could. That's why they advocated staying in the single market and customs union. It's all over the Leave literature. They've said it in interviews, whatever. But as soon as they're out, they've pushed for the hardest possible form of Brexit. Why? Because the zealots have taken over the party and have taken over running it. And everyone is desperate not to upset them. Even though you could basically hoist them by their own petard for all the damage that they have caused. But they are still, unfortunately, a very powerful force, and no one in the Conservative Party seems to be able to be willing enough to stand up to them. Not even people, their own journalists here, even Conservative Home, want to call them out on it. But hey, there you go. Downing Street's official line is that the deadlines can be a hindrance rather than helpful when it comes to negotiations. Perhaps it is thinking of the Brexit talks when it says so, or that those that took place before Northern Ireland's successions of agreements, the Belfast, St Andrews, Stormont House, and Fresh Start ones. During some of them, deadlines came and went. Or it may be the process in the negotiations to keep them under wraps, and number 10 simply doesn't want to declare its hand. But even if it isn't the case, I wonder if the conventional view is right. Absolutely, it's a bad thing for Northern Ireland to be left with parts of the agreement and effective suspension, at least until or unless its people settle on a replacement. But it's not necessarily in Rishi Sunak's interest for a full negotiating settlement to be reached. As Henry Hill once wrote on this site late last year, the EU has given no sign that it is willing to accept changes to the protocol's text, and in particular to those that set out the role within its framework of the European Court of Justice. Why? Because the EU is fulfilling its own obligations. Because the European Court of Justice, in any dispute about Good Friday protocol, the Good Friday Agreement, it is to be used as the neutral arbiter. If Rishi Sunak were to do it somehow a deal, or the EU were to throw that out, that gets rid of the European Court of Justice, which could throw the entire peace agreement into complete jeopardy. So the EU is not being obstinate or anything like that. It knows why it is there. But for some reason, again, the Conservatives are desperate to get rid of the European Court of Justice. They have been trying to get rid of it for the past year or so now because they recognize it's an impediment to their crazy free market fundamentalist principles that they want to do. So they want to try and get rid of it as much as they can. And yet they themselves know that they can't because why that's there. So perhaps the negotiations have and are finding some creative ways of leaving that text intact, unamending the role of the court in practice, and so squaring the Democratic Unionist Party and the European Research Group. How likely do you think that is? Absolutely not. I think Sunak is desperately scared of both of those groups. Absolutely. I think he's far more scared of the European Research Group than he is the DUP, because obviously, compared to Theresa May, the DUP was propping up her party. That's why the European Research Group cozied up to the DUP and, egged them on to, oust Theresa May. So, for even were Jeffrey Donaldson, the DUP leader, willing to accept such a fudge, and I'm not suggesting that he would have his parliamentary colleagues to think of. And just as he would be looking over his shoulder at them, so too would they be looking over at theirs at DUP members. The history of Northern Ireland Unionists is marked by leaders who sought accommodation being brought down by others who didn't, at least last time. Think Brian Faulkner, think David Trimble. So while the DUP, and this just goes to show you the whole real problem with the DUP, is that they are stuck in the past and cannot think even momentarily about a potential future. As far as they are concerned, they would far rather go back to sort of pre-Good Friday Agreement days. I mean, they are actively trying, know that if they can get rid of this protocol, that could throw out, the whole Northern Ireland Protocol. They know exactly what they are doing. This isn't them being obstinate about it. There is an agenda behind all of this. And unfortunately, it, they need to start to be called out for what they are doing. Unfortunately, they aren't, which is really depressing. But there you go. So while the DUP opposed the protocol at the time, all but two Conservative MPs, Owen Paterson and John Wedgwood, voted for the withdrawal agreement for which it was part. Again, as we said at the beginning, the DUP opposed the protocol. They were against the withdrawal agreement. They were hoping all those ERGers would join in again and say, no, we can't do this. But even then, they were saying, oh my God, Boris Johnson's deal, it gets Brexit done. And then all of a sudden they read it and went, hold on a moment, what's this? What's this? When they started to read the detail, they really signed up to what they'd realized, and they got thrown under the bus pretty hard. But back to it. So for which it was part, that is to say that Boris Johnson versions, not Theresa May's, David Frost has set out the reasons why Johnson's government agreed to the protocol in its present form with a heavy heart. He also argues that it now breaches the Belfast Agreement in itself. Then why was this deal so perfect? You just go to see how desperate they were just to try and finish, or at least perceive to be getting, finishing Brexit once and for all. When we said, no, this doesn't finish Brexit. This just opens a brand new chapter in the whole Brexit saga. Anyway, Roderick Crawford, now of Policy Exchange, has explained the rationale for his view in a series of articles on Conservative Home, and is the driving force behind the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which aims to fix parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, restore stability, and protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The four important areas which it would, quote, allow the government to address the practical problems the protocol has created include the democratic governance issues. And here's the thing. Most of the problems in and around the protocol are very technical areas that can be sorted through negotiation. But the problem is, as we've said before, any of the pro-Brexiteers are like, any negotiation, that is capitulation to the EU. So there can be, again, according to the Brexiteers, absolutely no negotiation whatsoever. Even as we've seen very recently, even to do things, common sense things like data sharing, which would make perfect sense and would help solve a lot of the problems in and around the protocol. Oh, no, you can't do that because that's sharing highly sensitive state secretive trade information. The Brexiteers made the case for it. You just start to see the whole problems of this now. So whether one thinks of Frost arguments and the bill itself, it is clear that some Conservative MPs, including ERG members, have a bad conscience about the protocol. After all, the deal which replaced Theresa May's, and of which it was part, won more Brexit freedoms for Great Britain, at the cost of agreeing fewer for Northern Ireland than for the rest of the UK, that is. So when push came to shove, most Tory MPs backing it behaved less like unionists than English nationalists. Wow. Golf clap for getting that right. I'll have to say, I'll give them that. They absolutely did. I'm really glad that he got that right. So, no wonder leading lights in the ERG have since, like Frost, campaigned to change the protocol he negotiated. The bill is partly a consequence, and any protocol deal which left the role of the court unchanged would thus be opposed, not only by the DUP, but the ERG too. Some claim that is no longer the force in Parliament that it was. Please note that it is the former chairman, Steve Baker, is now Minister of State for Northern Ireland office. So that is an interesting case, trying to make the case here. The ERG maybe isn't the force that it was. That may be the case, but I wouldn't say that it still doesn't have influence. I still wouldn't say that it's still very influential. And of course, you've got, again, Steve Baker, Minister for State for Northern Ireland in office. He's right. They are still very influential with Steve Baker being there. Not to mention the myriad of other groups that now exist as well in the mold and style of the ERG. As we've said, the Conservative Party is in an absolute mess. So perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. Either way, another element will be part of Downing Street's calculations, Johnson himself. In my view, it would be wide of the mark to suggest that in opposing a protocol settlement, he would be aiming to bring Sunak down and put himself back in. And I suspect that he is not set on standing in a Conservative leadership election this year should one arise, any more than he stood in for a second one last year. I think that's, bear in mind yourself, I don't think Johnson would oppose a deal. I don't think he would stand in the way. And I think, again, if he did, it would be to bring down Sunak. But if he did, he would actually have to be standing against it and actually be bringing forth an alternative. The whole reason Boris Johnson got in and took down Theresa May was because he was offering the alternative. He was offering his oven-ready deal. That's what he was offering. And at the end of the day, that's what most of his MPs went for. That's why they took down Theresa May. But Johnson, like Frost, will not have been very happy about being put in a negotiating corner, as he sees it, by the legacy of May's negotiations and the truance of the turbulence of the 2017 to 19 Parliament, with its Letwin Amendment, its Benn Act, and its measures to prevent no deal. The former Prime Minister is frequently represented as a man of no consequence, but the difference between the unionist rhetoric he delivered at a DUP conference and the protocol itself will rankle. As Number 10 looks ahead, it must see the possibility of a Sunak government be calmed, Johnson in revolt, difficult local elections ahead, and goodness knows what else is going on at the time. And as I write, Downing Street has not closed down the controversy about Nadhim Zahawi and that about Johnson himself. His financial affairs, Richard Sharp, and the BBC still rages. There is the idea that there will ever be a calm moment for Sunak. Absolutely not. Sunak has proven to be the weakest leader of the modern Conservative Party. And I will say this now: I think even Boris Johnson, if you were to sort of look at, I suppose, at the end of Rishi Sunak's premiership, you could, I think, make the case that Boris Johnson might have been a better leader than Rishi Sunak, because at least he had the party somewhat united behind him. Sunak has never had that. But let's continue. So these are the stones that could set off an avalanche. That is to say, heaven help us, another leadership ballot. So even they know there's all likely there could be one coming. But oh boy. Sunak's strategy to date appears to be Leighton Crosby's. In 2015, as repurposed by Isaac Livo for now. That is to say, set out priorities, stick to them, and junk nearly everything else. So it is that the Prime Minister has reached compromises with Tory backbenchers over housing, onshore wind, online harms, trans conversion therapy, and more. And remember, he's only had to do that because he has been in such a weak position. He has been forced. to compromise over these, even though he may not have wanted to compromise. He may have just wanted to put those in the bin completely. And remember, we've had rebellions about rebellions. So it just goes to show you how weak Sunak is and how many of these different factions are pushing their own agenda. There is no united Conservative Party plan in this. And how the Northern Ireland Protocol goes, I generally couldn't tell you. But unfortunately, if Sunak gets this wrong, there will be consequences. So the plan is not consistent with a deal on the protocol that risks a revolt. And I don't see how he achieves that. There is absolutely no way Sunak could do a deal which helps to solve the Northern Ireland Protocol problem, which does not lead to a revolt. And this is why I have said that I think this is where Labour could come in and say, hey, look, the Conservatives are being absolutely ridiculous. If you need Labour support, which will be a massive benefit, to get this done in the national interest, we will supply votes so long as this is reasonable amendments. But at that point, Labour potentially could also have a lot of power over Rishi Sunak, which could be even more wild. So the logic of the situation suggests that eased relations with the EU and a few technical tweaks to custom processes, which I think is what we are looking at, to be honest. Maybe that's enough for a joint announcement and a Biden visit, while the bill's completion is delayed. And the clauses would not address the democratic governance that never removed. The plan may not happen and may not work, but Sunak is kicking many cans down the long road to the next election. And one more wouldn't make much difference, unless you live in Northern Ireland, that is. And I would argue the longer this goes on, the worse it becomes. The worse it becomes. And, I'll say it now. Theresa May's deal for Northern Ireland, ultimately, it wouldn't have solved all the problems I think we see in Northern Ireland. If it had passed, would we be seeing DUP acting like this now? Potentially, maybe. We really don't know. That's certainly for sure. But I'll tell you what, I have to wonder if a lot of Conservative MPs are now looking back and going, should we have got rid of Theresa May? Because I'll tell you what, he was right about Tory MPs' positions on that they did not act like unionists and instead acted like English nationalists. I have to wonder if we will one day look back and actually see that. And if you'll even get Tory MPs maybe admitting, getting rid of Theresa May was the worst thing we ever did and going for Boris Steele was the worst thing we ever made. I wonder if we'll ever get to that point. But who knows? Who knows? But I think once they're out of power, if they lose the next general election, things are going to get wild in the Conservative Party. Things are going to get absolutely wild because there is no way Sunak stays in power. He will absolutely be challenged. And then I think, to be honest, we'll just go into a continuous revolving door of new Conservative leader after new Conservative leader. I think it will. I think it will be just a completely full-blown Tory civil war. And of course, it'll be up to Labour to sort this out then. And to be honest, we haven't really heard too much from Starmer on this. And I think if you're potentially going to look to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, maybe this should be one of the things you should be looking at. Going, okay, how is Labour going to solve this problem? because he absolutely really needs to solve this problem if he comes in. And one of the things he will have to do is he will have to take the DUP to task over this. Absolutely. Start raking them over the coals for their actions, because it is them who are stopping this. It is unfair to the people of Northern Ireland. It is unfair for the fact that when you look at the last Stormont elections, people voted overwhelmingly in favour of parties that were supportive of the protocol. But because of how Stormont is set up, the DUP are always going to be there. They're always going to be that thorn in the side. They might not be first minister anymore, but they'll always be second. And then that means they can always cause this kind of havoc, just again and again and again and again. And it is not good, because this has serious consequences. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, etc., etc. You know the drill by now. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.